We continue with our coverage on the situation ongoing in Iran, and France's UN ambassador Jerome Bonifant has called for the international community to denounce the violence against protesters in Iran. He highlighted the scale and brutality of the repression and reiterated France's demand for the immediate release of detainees and a suspension of the death penalty. Bonifant also called for a special session of the UN Human Rights Council to investigate rights violations in Iran. Meanwhile, several Middle Eastern allies of the US have urged the Trump administration to delay military strikes against Iran. Officials from Egypt, Oman, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have expressed concerns that a US military intervention could shock the global economy and further destabilize an already volatile situation. Joining us to discuss this is Major General Sudhakar Ji. He is a senior geopolitical and strategic defense expert joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, of course. This situation coming out of the UNSC, Western powers are making their voice heard when it comes to condemning Iranian regime action against the protesters in the country. However, sanctions seem to be the call being floated by most of these countries, given the fact that Donald Trump seems to have missed his golden opportunity to strike Iran when the protests were at their height. How effective are sanctions in this current environment in Iran? Do they risk making those economic struggles that the Iranian people were already facing even harder?
Good afternoon, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your show. Absolutely. Coming straight to the question, I think in your question lies the answer. There is very little impact on the government of Iran if the sanctions are further made or strengthened. They will be impacting the livelihood of the common man of Iran, very rightly observed by you. But at the same time, this also would have a secondary and tertiary impact on the government functioning. It will put some kind of pressure on the government, which is actually quite visible at the moment. But having said that, what is to be taken note of is I do agree that Donald Trump may have missed the opportunity at the peak of heightened civil unrest, but the opportunity in military affairs is actually ever fertile and continues to remain open, and America would be able to take advantage of the leverage and strike at an opportune moment, even though the peak moment would have been missed. One. Number two, there is a growing concern amongst the Arabic nations, let's say Oman, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, such like countries, Qatar to a large extent. They have also expressed their concern that any military strike by USA is going to jeopardize and impact very adversely the economy, the political situation, and aggravate the current unrest, which is ongoing for quite some time. Number two, it will also impact the supply chain of the oil and the oil price in the international market. Mindful of the fact that almost about 27 to 33% of global oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz from Persian Gulf to the main sea lanes of communication across Indian Ocean, as also some of them skirt around, go towards Red Sea through Suez Canal into Mediterranean, then to Atlantic. This also is going to be adversely impacted. Also, we need to keep in mind that when we talk about Iran, their proxies they may have been weakened, but they are not out till now. They are still able to revive their combat capability. The Houthis on the shoulders of Yemen, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, and the Hadil al-Saif and other militias in Iraq, like the way they have been brought in by Iran to carry out attack on the civilians.
Yes.
So, so these proxies also have some kind of a residual combat power. They can play mayhem and strike the American bases which are existing as of today in the Middle East, and thereby jeopardize further military operations and also inflict very heavy casualties on troops of the American armed forces.
Major General G, of course, Israel didn't necessarily support publicly United States intervention here, military strikes here. However, it was not unknown. Many Israelis that we've spoken to on here very much were in support of the United States intervention. What do you think deep down that the Israelis will be feeling that some of the Arab powers in the Middle East, like Egypt, Oman, Saudi Arabia, have convinced the United States possibly in not toppling the Iranian regime with military intervention at this present moment?
Precisely. I think spot on. Israel not coming out openly as it used to do in the past is simply in keeping with the evolving dynamics in the international relations and the pressure mounting from the Arabic nations against America's potential military strike against Iran. That itself will have very serious impact as far as the stability in the Middle East is concerned, and mindful of the fact that Iran, as on today, in past 6 to 8 months or so, has been able to rejuvenate its defense industrial production line and have been able to produce large number of killer drones, call them by any name, and the hypersonic missiles. They also, last time, when it was merely the nuclear installations were being targeted as a retaliation, they had adopted a good measure to counter or retaliate Israel's attack against Iran. This time the regime threat is much more higher and bigger threat than that of in the past. So therefore I visualize that Iran, if it is cornered too much, it's like the story of a cat being cornered within the four walls. A stage comes when the cat will be left with no option but to pounce against the aggressor. So it shouldn't happen that Iran is cornered, supported by its allies, so-called temporary allies within the Middle East itself, who have denied the airspace and the land to be used by American forces from their soil and also their airspace. So all these things, they complicate the eventualities and complicate the complete scenario. And the trade traffic of oil cargoes and the gas moving from Persian Gulf is also going to pose a huge threat to the international price of oil as also gas. This is going to further complicate the commercial aspects and the economy, which is already feeling the global geopolitical churn in an adverse manner. Back to you, Thomas.
Okay, do stay with us, Major General G, as we move over to the Americas for our next story. And Cuba has received the remains of its 32 soldiers who died in combat during the United States' attack on Venezuela to remove former President Nicolas Maduro. During a ceremony honoring the island's military personnel as heroes, Interior Minister Major General Lazo Alberto Alvarez commented on the United States' show of wealth and power, asserting that the dignity of the Cuban people cannot be purchased. Let's listen in to what the Interior Minister Major General Lazo Alberto Alvarez had to say.
En aquellas horas difíciles, cuando en la madrugada del 3 de enero la agresión y el artero ataque ensombreció a Venezuela, ahí estuvieron nuestros combatientes, fieles a Fidel, a Raúl, al partido y al legado del internacionalismo que ha marcado cada etapa de la Revolución Cubana.
Of course, 32 individuals, 32 of its citizens were killed in the January the 3rd strikes on Kakaras, Major General G. That's not an insignificant number at all. Also, of course, Donald Trump has been issuing threats towards the current Cuban government. And given that Cuba is only 90 miles off the Floridian coast and a long time, some would say, adversary of the United States, how does this situation feed into the broader Cuba-United States relations moving forward?
Thomas, what needs to be understood is that Cuba and Venezuela, they enjoy a strategic relationship based on a mutual commitment to each other's government. And when we talk about this, let's address the issue regarding Cuba first, thereafter the Cuban and the US relationship. To my understanding, the Cuban intelligence and military personnel have long been deeply integrated into Venezuela's security apparatus, including providing personal security for past and present leaders. And the death of 32 Cuban military personnel during January 2026 US operation, it underscored the depth of this security cooperation. So this is one part of the answer to your question. The most important part which you have raised is the Cuba and the USA relationship. Yes, it is in the ambit of the security imperative of USA. Cuba being what it is today, with almost a very high rate of inflation and a large number of Cubans having immigrated to Florida, there are almost about 500,000 or more. That itself is posing a bigger deterrence and taking the mind back to the Bay of Pigs operation, which took place in 1961,
Yes.
where the USA had a disastrous outcome in that operation. And the leadership in USA, they had to bury the hatchet, and they were very seriously embarrassed in the international opinion as also image. Now, keeping that in the back of the mind, Cuba as on today has very high unemployment. The line of supply of oil having been choked, they have power outages, almost 16 to 20 hours per day, they are without power, and also they don't even have a square meal for a day. People are actually going through a very critical phase of livelihood, do not have employment, population being about 1 crore, 1.1 crore or so. There is a poverty level in the country which is more than 85% of the total population which live below the poverty level. That being the situation, America is actually looking at one point, that is the relationship between Cuba and Russia having been concretized in the month of March/April 2025, where Cuba has offered that its soil or land could be utilized for deployment of offensive weapon platforms by Russia. This actually has caused a trigger in the thought process of the think tanks and Pentagon in USA. And thereafter, the national security strategy has come into existence, that is of 2025, wherein the Monroe Doctrine has been revived in full spirit and vigor.
Yes.
The Western Hemisphere, that is across Atlantic, the Americas continues to remain, as is being asserted by USA today, under the domain and dominance of USA. Any interference by any party as of now is being taken as a precise interference in the dominance of the USA, which is not going to be taken very kindly. As far as the relationship between Cuba and USA is concerned, take your mind back to an agreement which was signed long back in 1961-62, wherein the agreement, the important central line of the agreement was that USA will continue to retain initiative to intervene should any forces inimical to national interest of USA is threatened. So that intervention capability or entitlement to USA as per that agreement with Cuba will continue to remain in favor of USA. If there is any threat, emerging from
I'm so
even
sorry, Major General G, I have to interrupt you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on the program, as always. We now turn over to North America, and US President Donald Trump is set to announce his choice for the Federal Reserve chair in the coming weeks. The White House spokeswoman, Caroline Leavitt, said there are several candidates he favors for the role. Trump has repeatedly criticized current FED chair Jerome Powell for keeping interest rates high, saying it raises government borrowing costs. The president's interventions have included attempts to remove top policymakers, including Lisa Cook. Some analysts warn that this standoff echoes Argentina's 2010 central bank crisis, where political pressure undermined economic stability. Let's listen in to what the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had to say on the issue.
Look, the president is in the same place as you all have been asking about this for many, many weeks. He's in a decision-making phase. There are a few people who he likes very much for this job, maybe less than that. The truth is, like with all decisions, it's a decision for the president to make. And he said to Reuters in that interview last night that he thinks he'll be finally making that decision in the next couple of weeks.
Keith Vaz joins us now. He's a former British minister and he joins us live from London. Keith, thank you very much for joining us. Quite a saga this has been, Keith. Of course, since the opening months of Donald Trump's second presidency, there has been a spat, a rift between the independent Federal Reserve chief, which Donald Trump appointed, and the president himself. How unusual is it for a US president to openly pressure the Federal Reserve like Donald Trump has done?
Good morning, Thomas. It is very unusual indeed. The Federal Reserve is one of those institutions which no president wants to interfere with because it is so important and so powerful. It's probably the most important and powerful central bank in the whole world. And what the Federal Reserve does, the rest of the world follows. So I'm not surprised that Jerome Powell has been on the phone to the governor of the Bank of England and the chairman of the central banks in Europe to talk to them about the situation there. And what's the point of all this? Because he's coming to the end of his term and it's not going to be renewed for sure. What is the point of having an investigation into him and dealing with these kinds of matters? Because it's like interfering, in a sense, with the work of the Chief Justice of the United States of America. You do so at your peril. And unusually, Thomas, you have Republican congressmen and senators now say that they are prepared to intervene in order to support the chairman of the Fed because of this apparent desire by Donald Trump to try and get rid of him early. He's also done this to other members of the bank's committee, you know, it's gone down very badly in the House of Representatives and the Senate and in America generally.
And Keith, of course, as you've said, Powell's term is set to end on May the 15th of this coming year, with Donald Trump being the person who's going to appoint a new Fed chair. If Donald Trump appoints someone more politically loyal to himself, how might that implicate both America's economy and the global economy?
Well, we need to wait and see who's being chosen, because I would imagine, I'm not an expert in the way in which the Senate works, but I would imagine the chairmanship of the Fed, and I'm guessing here, so if anyone starts ringing up and saying that you know, I've got it wrong, I'm guessing, but I would imagine that the chairman of the Fed would have to be approved by the Senate Banking Committee. That's usually the case with all big public appointments. He can't just appoint, he needs to put this person before the Senate and the probably the Senate Banking Committee rather than the House Banking Committee. But it's such a big job, it might go to both. But he won't be able to just say, you're appointed. Ring you up, Thomas, and say, Thomas, you're the new head of the Fed. You would have to go before the Senate Banking Committee and be approved. At this moment in time, with midterm elections coming up in November and talks of impeachment if Donald Trump invades Greenland, general anger about the bombing of Venezuela, I think that you might get a very strange result. They won't automatically vote according to party lines, but he's obviously got someone in mind. Looking at his previous appointments, to all the appointments he's made, he's learned from his second term. He's learned from his first term in this second term. He's not appointing technocrats. He is appointing 100% loyalists to these jobs.
Yes, Keith Vaz, do stay with us as we move over to the African continent for our next update. And the veteran Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, is holding a commanding lead early in the election results announced today. The 81-year-old Museveni has ruled Uganda since seizing power in 1986 and is looking for a decisive victory to assert his political strength as speculation mounts about his eventual succession. Results announced by the Electoral Commission shows Museveni with 76.25% of the vote based on tallies from nearly half of polling stations. Meanwhile, Bobi Wine is trailing with 19.85% of the remaining vote, split among 6 other candidates. After casting his ballot, Museveni had said that he expected to win with 80% of the vote if there's no cheating. The pop star turned politician Bobi Wine has alleged massive fraud during the election, which was held under an internet blackout following a campaign marred by violence. Wine, whose legal name is Robert Kulagulini, called on his supporters to protest, though there has been no sign of demonstrations so far. Keith joins us once again. Museveni has been in power for nearly 4 decades now. Does this continued dominance by him reflect popular support, with 76% of the vote counted so far, according to the officials there, or a system designed to keep him in office?
Well, I was in Uganda a few months ago and I met President Museveni. Even though, as people point out, he is quite senior in terms of age, he was very clued up about what was going on. I think there is no question that he can still do the job. Sometimes as one gets older, people suspect that you're not quite up to it. But there's no doubt that he is in command of his country and he knows what he's doing. Whether or not there has been any irregularities, I think that probably is something that you need to look at by an independent commission. He is clearly very popular amongst his own people. He's got obviously the command of his government. And usually when people have served a long term and people think they're time to move on, you don't get toppled by your opposition. You get toppled by people in your own administration. And it seems very clear that he is extremely popular in his own administration. Uganda is prospering. The economy is doing well. Some would argue not as well as Kenya next door. More should be done. But he is a great personality. He's, 4 decades. The top vote I got elected with ever is 65% after 30 years. So I'd take 79% if I was him. And Bobi Wine is a very popular figure. There's no doubt about that. But the fact is, he's not a politician. And I think that what is required at this moment in a country like Uganda is stability more than anything else. It needs to be stable and it needs to be a country that is well run. And certainly from the point of view of its international face, Uganda is doing very well indeed. I think tourism is picking up again. the whole of Africa has a lot to give to the world. So I'm not surprised at these figures. I'm not surprised that he's been re-elected. And I would imagine this is probably going to be the kind of percentage that the final figures will show.
An internet blackout is quite a move, and of course, an 80% is a huge amount of the vote share. Of course, it comes as we see these votes, elections in the African continent, where we see ridiculous figures when it comes out of over 90% sometimes. We saw Tanzania with opposition quashed. Why is the internet being blacked out?
Well, I don't know. I know what it's like when I can't link up to the internet anywhere that I go in the whole world. I go completely berserk. Sometimes you ban opinion polls just before elections so as not to influence people. I don't know why. But let's be fair to Africa. I think, and I'm guessing here, Thomas, because, I can't remember, but I think that Vladimir Putin's results were probably higher than Museveni's. So we do get these very dramatic figures where you have a very strong leader who's been in office for a very long time. And therefore, this is something that we need to watch. I mean, who knows? In this country, we have first past the post, which means if you win a particular seat, then by a majority, then you win. Other countries, you have proportional representation. I was a big supporter of first past the post when I kept winning, but I think that probably a fairer system is proportional representation. In a case like Uganda, it wouldn't apply because if you get over 51%, then you won anyway. But I'm not sure who blacked out the internet. This is getting to be quite a common occurrence in not just this country, but in others. Who knows why this was done?
Indeed. Keith Vaz, as always, it is a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. We now move to the Indo-Pacific once again, and social media companies in Australia have shut down nearly 5 million accounts belonging to teenagers just 1 month after a new ban on under 16 users came into effect. The country's internet safety regulator said around 4.7 million accounts were removed to follow the law, which started on December the 1st last year. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the move is clearly working and called it a moment of pride for Australia, saying the law is now being copied around the world. Other countries like France, Malaysia and Indonesia are planning similar rules, while some European nations and US states are also discussing it. According to reports, the number of accounts removed is much higher than expected, with more than 2 accounts shut down for every Australian aged between 10 to 16. Major platforms like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat and Twitter have all complied with the ban. Smaller social media apps saw a short-term rise in use, but regulators say those users did not stay active. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.